Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual. I'm delighted to be joined today by an incredible guest, a person who I've been watching when we started doing this series on cash flow. I was reaching out for where am I going to get the most value, where am I going to get the most insight from really experienced people, and the person's name that came up again and again for me was Clayton M. The reason being is that he has had an incredible career going from legal executive all the way up to founding and managing his own business that's helps other business leaders to manage debt and improve cash flow, and himself is the host of the Cashflow Show, in which he works with and talks to other business leaders about the sorts of challenges that they have. So as a result, I'm really looking forward to going deep into some of the challenges and some of the experiences that Clayton has had, both himself, but also with his clients and even guests on his podcast. Clayton, welcome to the podcast.
Alexis, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to sharing what I know and hearing about your experiences as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. And I really want to start off, I guess, with your journey. I want to people to hear about some of the steps that you went through, and particularly what moments kind of led you to go down that journey of looking at cash flow and debt management and so on. Because, you know, it's not necessarily the natural way that all of us end up looking at things. So tell us a bit about your journey, and particularly those trigger points that meant that this was an area of focus for you.
Well, for me, it goes back probably now maybe about 23 years. God, that sounds a long time. But it is. Ultimately, what I did, I left school and I decided I wanted to get into law. So I became at the time what they describe as an outdoor clerk, which is basically like a runner. You went to the courts, you delivered stuff, you got a feel for what the court system was like, which is much different than it is nowadays, where a lot of the courts have shut. So you had to go and deliver applications, you had to go to a barrister's chambers. And for example, I worked for a very small firm called Parker Thomas and Partners, which is at the basement in Kingsway. The front of it was in Kingsway. The back end of it was in Lincoln's Inn Fields. It backed onto there. And we were about 10 doors up from the Queen's solicitors, Farrer and Co. Or I think they're probably King Charles's solicitors now anyway. But it was in the centre of effectively where everything was as far as law was concerned, up the road from the Law Society and the Royal Courts of Justice. So I started there. And after a while, I thought, you know, I'd always wanted to be involved in law. That was my thing. I'd watched all these TV programs and I was really into it in a big way. And as a result of that, I then basically signed up as an outdoor clerk and did that for a little while and decided I wanted to progress. And the next progression was as a legal executive. And legal executives have changed now because they effectively do exactly the same work as a solicitor and get exactly the same respect and recognition. But at that time, you were just underneath the sort of level of what solicitors were. But obviously, there were a lot of people who had been legal execs who were incredibly well qualified, but they were also had the practical skills, because a lot of people had gone to university and they'd done a law degree or whatever, and obviously then done the legal practice course, but they didn't have the experience of getting shouted at by the judge.
No.
And that that is character building. You know, one of the things that would happen to you would be you would get up, you would have a set of papers and you'd be told to go to an application in front of the judge. He would then kick your backside. Then you would go back to the office and you would amend that. And then you would bring it back. And then you would get your ass kicked again. And then until you got it right. So it built up a certain amount of resilience. It was a certain amount of character building. But you learned, to get things right. But what you also learned, which was almost as a side issue, you learned to deal with people. And that was it. That was the key factor. For example, a lot of people would come, say, from outside of London into the court system, and they would come in and say, I'm a solicitor from Dorset, and I want you to do this, blah, blah, blah. And the court staff would look at them and say, of course, we'll take that from you and put it to the bottom of the pile. However, for those people who had built relationships, and I'll come back to relationships again, who had built relationships over a period of time, court staff, you could come in at 1 minute to 4:30 or 1 minute to 4 o'clock, whenever it was going to close, and you could get something done because you had a relationship. So that's how the legal side started. And I'd been doing that for some considerable time. And I then started to almost sort of fall out of love with it to a certain extent. I wanted to move away because I then moved on to local authority, and I was a local authority lawyer for quite a while. We did a lot of things to do with housing, lots of tenancy disputes. At that time, I was working for the London Borough of Hackney, and there were lots of squatters in Hackney at that time. And and I suppose it was a time when Hackney wasn't as gentrified as it is now. It's become gentrified quite heavily over the last few years. And in doing so, the whole outlook changed. So apart from being a haven for squatters as it was now, it's now become so gentrified and so arty, it's a completely different place. But then it was pretty rough, to say the least.
Yeah.
But I realized after a while that it was time to sort of leave there and do something different. At the back of my mind, I'd always wanted to do a business or be in business, but I didn't want to necessarily be in business as a lawyer, as a pure lawyer. That didn't excite me. But I'd always dreamed of being a commander, a leader of my own destiny. That's what I wanted to do. So in doing so, I then basically thought, right, I'm going to stop doing this stuff. I'm just going to stop being involved in law, and I'm going to do something completely different. But there's a scene in The Godfather where, I think it's The Godfather episode 3 or version 3, where Michael Corleone says, every time I try to get away, they just pull me back in.
Yeah.
And that was my relationship with the law, because everybody kept on saying, oh, I noticed you did law. I wonder if you'd be, open to doing this. I thought, oh, I'm trying to get away from this, but it's what I knew and it paid. So I ended up doing it. And then one day I got a call from an agency, because back in the day, there were loads of agencies that did lots of locum work. So they would go and find you work all over the place. And they said, oh, we've got a job and it's in Hatfield. I said, where's Hatfield? I'm a London guy, and
Yeah. Not that far out.
it's not, but it's not a place that I'd ever been to. So I thought, Hatfield. So
above the
I got out
M25,
the tube map that I had, or the extended Greater London tube map at the time,
Yeah.
and found that Hatfield was in Hertfordshire. So I thought, oh, okay, this could be different. They said, oh, it's a debt recovery, debt collection job, and I'd never done pure debt collection, and I thought, I quite fancy that. Let me give that a try. So I turned up, and it was for the British Nursing Association, which my friends were teasing me about, but I managed to get through that. And so I turned up, and they said, well, here's a desk, here's a chair, we've got some filing cabinets here, get on with it. So I was then thrown sort of headlong into this debt recovery role. And obviously I'd had dealings with the court, I'd basically issued proceedings and so on and so forth. So it wasn't anything that was completely alien, but it was a completely different situation. So that was my first pure debt recovery role. And I did that it was supposed to be for 3 months, and I stayed for nearly 2 years.
Yeah. Okay.
And they then sort of called me in one day and said, well, we really enjoyed working with you, but there's no more work left. You've cleared it. So
Brilliant. You'd made yourself redundant because of your success. Excellent. Yeah. Good.
So that was the end of that. And I thought, but maybe I could do this for a living. Maybe I could be that guy that could do this for people who are not necessarily as big as the company I'm working for,
Nice.
but for smaller businesses. And that started the journey.
That's amazing. And so, yeah, so your journey around helping initially the Nursing Association to get cash in and get its debtors to pay led to you going, well, actually, maybe I could help others to do that, which is awesome because it's an area that so many people find difficult, terrifying, like an area that they want to avoid.
Mm.
But for you, I mean, you've gone further then because you could have just said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to provide a bit of a service agency where you give us a load of invoices, we chase them up for you." But that isn't what you've done, right? You've gone way further into the industry in terms of helping people with the understanding and the coping with it, and through your podcast and so on. So, what can you perhaps share? Some moments in your life experiences that have really fueled your passion for helping businesses handle their debt and cash flow rather than just doing a bit of processing.
I think for me, I realized very early on that debt recovery or late payments or whatever people want to describe it as has more to do with your mindset and your personal feeling. When I first started, people would dive into the toilets as soon as I mentioned debt recovery. And there is still an incredible stigma about debt recovery and debt collection. It really is a thing that makes a lot of businesses feel very, very uncomfortable. But what I realized early on, one of my first clients was a lady. When I started, I knew nothing about business at all whatsoever. I'd always worked for someone or worked for a local authority. So it wasn't about me necessarily generating profit. So my role really was to come in, do the job, get the job done, and I would be paid a salary. But what I realized was that in doing so, I then had to not just recover money, but I had to change somebody's mindset. And the mindset is what's most important, because a lot of people, their mindset is based on where they're from. So when I speak to Americans about debt recovery or late payments, their attitude is completely different. I did a job for you, buddy. You owe me money. You pay me. There's a scene in Goodfellas. Sorry, I'll keep mentioning gangster movies. I am not a part-time gangster, I swear, but there is a great analogy to be
Or
had.
film critic.
And where Ray Liotta says it in Goodfellas, such and such and such, you pay me. Such and such, you pay me. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. And that's the American mentality. The British mentality is, oh, could you see your way clear to offering me some of that money that you promised me, etc., etc. It's a different mentality. And one of the first jobs that I had when I started, it was really small. It was a lady. She was a cleaning lady. And she'd done some cleaning for a lady in Blackheath, which is in southeast London, at one of the posher ends of southeast London. And she'd done this job, and she'd obviously left her home and did the cleaning, but she wasn't getting paid. And I think she must have found me in what would have been probably the Yellow Pages back in the day, and decided to call. And it wasn't a massive amount of money. It was actually quite a small amount of money relatively, but it was the principle and the fact of, I don't do this because of purely the money. The money's helpful because that's how you run your business. But the fact is, it's the principle that a person, whether they're a small business, a medium business, has done some work in the promise or with the promise of getting paid. And our job is to help that smaller business deal with this almost Samson and Goliath relationship. And that relationship, in terms of that lady who was a cleaner and who is effectively someone who was quite well to do, she just wouldn't pay her. And I suppose that gets me going. So that gives me something to get my teeth into. Because if somebody says, I don't have it and I can't pay it, that's one thing. But when somebody then belittles somebody and then says, well, I don't think that you're worthy of being paid, that to me is wrong. And I'd rather take that case than take a case for somebody who basically it's a massive amount of money, because it's not the money. It's the fact that justice hasn't been served. That's the most important thing.
Love that. So, which links beautifully back to where you started, right? In your legal role and yeah, upholding those values. That's awesome. And I mean, for you, working with those individuals, those businesses, where, as you say, it's like the David and Goliath thing, where like it's the underdog wanting the money from the others. What does that, I mean, you've worked with so many clients in the space. Like, what does that feel like to them? You know, what kind of situation are you often helping people out of? Because generally, when people are looking for help around cash flow or debt recovery or whatever it is, rarely is it a case of, oh yeah, no, everything's fine. You know, I was just thinking it'd be good if we got this one invoice paid. It's annoying, it's slightly annoying to me. Like, that's not where they're at emotionally, is it? Like, what paint us a picture of what it's actually like for a business leader who's in that space.
It depends on the size, but normally you've got, say, maybe a medium business. Maybe they can be in a position where they have a bigger business and there's a £30,000 invoice that's outstanding. That's for sort of media business.
Okay.
They're sitting there thinking to themselves, this £30,000 is sitting on the ledger. It's not moving. It's not going anywhere. If there's more than one person involved in the business, other people are looking at that and saying, why isn't this being collected?
Yeah.
Where is this going? And that then adds pressure. And that's the start of it. If you take it to a smaller business, the invoice might be smaller. It might be £5,000. But when an average mortgage is probably 1,500 a month, a couple of those or 2 or 3 months, that's wiped out that invoice. But then
Yeah.
you then get the pressure because you can't really talk to other people about because they don't seem to understand. You can talk to your partner and your partner might say, well, yes, dear, I see where you're coming from, but can't you just ask them for it? But it doesn't work that way because you've now built up a relationship. And this is where relationships happen. Most people meet people through networking
Yep.
or some kind of networking, whether online or whatever the case may be. And so you that meet that person and then you then choose to start doing business with them. Most people don't understand the analogy between business and dating. It's incredibly similar, very, very similar, but people choose not to acknowledge it. If you go on to, say, Tinder, I don't know whether you swipe left or right. I'm out of that game, so I don't know what you do. But if you pick a person who is completely unknown to you, and then you then meet that person and have a physical relationship with them, you don't know really what you're going to get or what you're being involved in. Most people who have business relationships with people are with people they know nothing about. So that leaves them open to that situation where that person may or may not pay. Now, what the thing is, apart from the not being paid, it's the embarrassment. Men and women deal with debt recovery completely different. Women are more likely to say, hi, Clayton, can you look at this for me? Because this isn't right or I'm not being paid. Whereas men still have a bit of the ego about them and they think, oh, I know I'm in problem and I know I'm in a problematic situation. I know I'm in difficulty, but I don't want to do anything about it. So that then piles on the stress. Then if you're a part of a couple or in a relationship, and somebody's not necessarily seeing it to be pulling their weight, that puts a pressure on the relationship, which makes home life difficult. If you're working from home at the same time as then running your business and you're in debt, the situation exacerbates. And that's where the pressure is because a lot of business owners are under pressure. And sometimes they just need that person that says, what went wrong? Is this a bad deal? Is this something that I'm never going to get the money back from? What's going on here? Because a lot of people get a telephone call at 5 o'clock on a Friday and they think, wow, I haven't had any business all week. This person's offering me a deal and it's, 5 grand, 10 grand, 15 grand. It's more money than I'm used to. And they then basically start a business relationship with them and then find themselves in a position going, oh my God, I've done all this work. I remember chasing a particular case where my client was a graphic designer and this guy had spun him some stories. I've never to, he was, his dad was a banker, an international financier or whatever the case may be. But he couldn't pay my client's debt because, it was a terrible situation. His bank account wasn't open and it had been frozen by somebody else. It was complete nonsense. But my client was 30 grand in the hole. And when you rang the debtor, he was in, oh God, he was on some tropical island, basically. That's where
Oh,
he was.
really?
Remember which one he was on. But he had no intention of paying my client
Yeah.
whatsoever. But my client had extended too much credit.
Wow. And so, I mean, when it comes to cash flow and managing debt, and particularly when we're talking about on the invoicing side, there's two sides to this, right? There's those businesses where they're struggling with cash flow, perhaps largely because they're struggling to get paid on the work that they've done, that they've invoiced, that they're owed, and as a result, they end up with invoices that are 30 days, 60, 90, 120 plus overdue. And as a result, that is a nightmare for cash management and for having cash in the business. And then, of course, there's businesses that might be listening to this where maybe they've done a bit more cash management, and so that it's less about pulling money in, but maybe they're in a position where they, for various reasons, tricky situations in the market or their own mistakes, whatever it is, that they're in a situation where they're in debt and that they owe people. So, and that, as you say, that pressure can build up really heavily, either because you haven't got cash because you are struggling to get it in, or you haven't got cash because you owe too many people and so on. Like, getting into that position, I think, can be really lonely as well for people, right? Because ultimately running out of cash is a heart attack. It kills the business if you completely run out of it. And often it's something that you can't talk about with other people, with clients, suppliers, etc., without almost making some of those problems worse. And as you say, it's very stressful for relationships if you share with your partner, and they may not fully understand why solving it isn't easy or how you could even get into that situation. So help us see the way out of these problems, whether it's a business leader who has got a situation where they've got too much that is owed to them, or a business leader that's got too much debt. And of course, the answer, it might be both, because it might be that they've struggled to get money in and therefore they're struggling to pay. What does that look like? I know that, from your podcast and from content that you put out, you talk about things like toxic debt and so on. Like, help us understand, perhaps use a real life example. Take us through going from being in real trouble and how that can be transformed. What's the starting point for someone in that situation?
The starting point is sitting down with a large cup of coffee or a large cup of tea,
Yeah.
and opening all the envelopes that you haven't opened.
Wow. That on its own, I can imagine, for many people is incredibly painful. I know of one particular business owner who I've interviewed on this podcast, who I know that he developed a phobia of, I think, brown envelopes.
Yes.
Because they tended to contain invoices and requests for payment that he was unable to pay. And so the first suggestion that you're making is open them all up.
You need to brew the strongest coffee you can find, the strongest cup of tea. You need to brew some builder's tea if you're a tea drinker, and you need to sit down and open up those things. It will be painful.
Mm-hmm.
It will be hell. But once you've got it all out there, they're all open, all the debts are there, and you then basically sit down and calculate exactly how much you owe as a debtor, let's say.
Yep.
That's your first step to acknowledgement. I used to hang around with a guy who was a chap who dealt in consumer debt or individual debt. And he always used to say it was, before he became a debt counselor, he was a drug and alcohol counselor. And one of the things in terms of drug and alcohol counseling is that you have to acknowledge that you've got a problem.
Yeah, love that.
Most people don't acknowledge that they've got. Sometimes you've got to sit down and just do the maths. And if you feel that you haven't got the nerve, because sometimes you can see the maths and you'll pass out because you realize how much. Because whatever you think you owe, there's a bit on top that you probably
Yeah, I
don't
agree.
realize that you owe. So get that all out in the open. In the current climate, you've got to realize there is no more free money. Second thing, no more free. Nobody's going to give you 0% interest rates, 1% interest rates,
No,
2%
indeed.
to come and save you. That was 10 years ago. So that's gone. So now you've got to deal with exactly what it is that you owe. Then you move on to the next problem, or the next situation is how much is owed to you.
Mm.
So you then look at the invoices, because you always used to see those programs used to be on many years ago, and where people would find money down the back of a sofa.
Yeah. Yeah, the cash in the attic, the cash in the sofa. Yeah,
Right.
it's yeah.
Because there's cash everywhere. That's the reason why eBay exists. There's cash everywhere.
Yeah.
Now, what most people don't realize is that their invoices contain cash.
Yeah.
They're not just invoices there on bits of paper. They've got cash there. That's the key thing. So therefore, you've got to look at your invoices, and let's just say your invoice is £10,100 owed to you, but at the
Yeah.
same time, you're in a position where you owe 9,900. If you are successful in collecting your invoices, that then wipes out your debt.
Yeah.
This is on a small level, so let's not
Yeah.
do big
But it
numbers
all
on this.
scales, right?
Yeah,
But it all scales. It's all relative, right?
exactly.
What you're saying is that if it's a larger business, it's the same game,
Same principle. But
and often the nature of it is that it's similar. It's they're often not far away from each other in terms of those two numbers. So I
exactly.
love that. So your starting point is get absolutely clear on those two piles: the
Yes,
amount to pay, the amount on both sides, the amount to pay others, the amount to be paid to you. Get clarity on what those numbers are, what the total amount is, and of course, if you've got up-to-date bookkeeping in your accounting system, that's easy to see, right? You can go see that
exactly.
on your balance sheet. You'll see that as your accounts receivable in your accounts payable, and you'll be able to see how that matches up. Cool. Love that as a starting point of getting clarity on the situation.
Exactly. So you've got
One.
clarity now, so you know exactly the thing. So that you know that there's no free money to rescue you. So the next problem that you have is that for some strange reason, and I don't know why this is, I still haven't got to the bottom of it. Larger debts appear to be easier to collect than smaller debts.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. But if somebody comes up with a debt of £500, it always seems quite difficult to collect. But the
It's
5,000
5,000,
or the
50,000.
£15,000
Yeah.
debt. So always
That's
factor that into
interesting.
the situation.
Yeah.
Anything over 90 days, you need to be working with that straight away. Straight away. Anything over 90 days. I think there was a report done by the Federation of Small Businesses for 2022, which worked out it was released in March 23, but said that 52% of businesses had experienced late payment, and 25% had reported increased late payment. That's probably gone up since then,
Yeah.
but that was in March 2023. But also, you have a situation where 37% had applied for credit to manage their cash flow. 37%.
Wow.
So imagine you've got a problem, but what
Yeah.
you're going to do, your sticking plaster, is to apply for more credit in order to solve your problem. I've always found that was madness, absolute madness. It's like basically having loads of money in your deposit account and not paying off your mortgage, but taking out a loan to buy something else. It doesn't make any sense. So that's the sort of logic that sometimes people build up. But 90 days is a very, very important figure. If somebody hasn't paid you in 90 days, it is a problem. End of story. Simple as that. So once you've dealt with that, you've looked at how much you owe, you've realized that you're not going to get any loans, you've realized that anything above 90 days is a major problem and you need to act on it. You then need to then define or divide your three piles.
Yep.
You've got your late payers, your slow payers, and your late and slow payers.
Yeah.
So that's three. So a Good Business Pays, which is a website which monitors bigger businesses that tend not to pay. So they monitor and sort of give out, I wouldn't say prizes, but give out sort of acknowledgement for businesses that pay within a 30-day
Oh,
period
nice. Okay.
or pay promptly. Those are great.
Did you say that's Good Business
Yeah,
Pays?
Good Business Pays.
Nice. Cool. So that's a website where you can actually go, I guess, particularly if you happen to work with large businesses,
Yes,
so
if
that you
you're
can
not
get a
working with
sense
much.
of, so you can get a sense of if you suddenly do a 6-figure contract with them, whether you're then going to have a nightmare for the next year or
Exactly.
not. Yeah.
And
Okay, cool.
and due diligence is really important, because this comes back to the dating analogy.
Yeah.
If you get together with somebody and then find out they're an axe murderer, but obviously their name's been all over the newspaper and you've not really taken it on board,
Yeah.
then, you put yourself in an awkward position. I mean, I've been around long enough where I know there are certain people that are dodgy and you probably shouldn't do business with them. And I can look at certain documents and see that, no, you might not want to do business with people like that,
Yeah.
because there's going to be a difficulty for you. So all of these things need to be taken into account. So once you've divided into late payers, slow payers, late and slow payers, you then have to then decide, which of these people am I going to continue to do business with? One of the biggest problems that I have is when people say, "Oh, Clayton, I worked with them to a particular point, and I should have cancelled the services, but I kept on giving them services." And I'm sitting there having
Wow.
just doing my Homer Simpson impression. I'm thinking, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And that's what people do. It's like they're in for 5,000, so they say, "Well, let me supply another £5,000 worth of services." Once you realize that somebody isn't paying, you can't continue to allow yourself to rack up more debt. That's never going to get paid.
I love that because it's almost it almost goes further on a concept which I've seen for picking your clients and firing your clients is
Yeah, oh
sometimes
yes, we're going to get onto that.
yeah, but it's like often I've seen that in the realm of painful clients to work with. The ones that are high maintenance, they don't want to spend very much with you, and it's the 20% of clients that cause 80% of your problem, and actually don't give you the profit and whatever. And so I've seen that before in that context. But the way that you've just introduced it as actually it relates to cash flow too is really interesting, because of course when we're looking at essentially firing a client, letting go of a client that you're saying, let's say they're worth, maybe they're a big client, maybe it's, but that client's worth 6 figures to me, it's £100,000 worth of business per year. And we might argue, but if they take up 9 times the effort of any other client, actually, yes, it's £100,000, but that's opportunity cost. You could be able to get another client worth £100,000 that would be a tenth of the effort, and then you could have 10 of those clients, and that would be worth $1 million. And what's interesting is essentially you're saying the same, but for cash. It's almost like opportunity cost of having done £100,000 worth of business for them, and yet not getting that cash back into your business to help you survive, to help you grow, means that and yet because you're serving them, you're not able to serve someone else. It's really, really interesting that through that lens, you can decide that, you know what? We don't work with slow payers. It's in fact, if anything, in the current market, we might value that more than the ones that are low maintenance, right? We might say, actually, I prefer a client who's a bit high maintenance but pays fast versus a client that's low maintenance but pays slow. And that's really interesting. Okay, so we've acknowledged the problem. We've got clarity. We've sorted it into boxes. We've understood that, yes, we need to deal with this. And we've decided that there are going to be some clients that we're not going to work with anymore
No.
at all, because they're just it's too bad. And then of course we're going to have some clients where actually they just need chasing, because for a lot of businesses they're not even doing the chasing right to properly get these invoices in. It's one of the reasons mentioned in the green room, like we wrote this guide for business leaders on how to improve your cash flow by having processes. And it strikes me that a lot of the things that we're talking about are made so much easier when you've got a process in place that means that you're catching these invoices at 90 days and that you're, or well before, and that you're going through that process to make sure that this stuff doesn't build up, right? And I'll make sure that share the link in the show notes, but for speed, it's at airmanual.link/cashflow/ebook for people to like check out that. But it strikes me that you need that process in place, but how do you make sure that you're doing the right things? Because for a lot of people, they'll say, okay, Clayton says I need to fire this client and I need to chase these invoices, and starting with the big ones because they're actually easier to chase. But how? Like, I haven't got the experience that Clayton's got. Clayton's worked with debt recovery. He's worked in the courts. Like, how do I actually approach this next?
The thing is, if you're a business owner, it might not necessarily be prudent for you to do that.
Nice.
Because can you literally spend a day phoning 10, 20 people who never pick up?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question. The fact
Yeah.
is that a lot of people say, oh, you know, I don't want to pay for debt recovery. I don't want to pay to chase late payments. And I always say to them, well, you think of your favorite business person, whoever it is, whether it's Richard Branson, Alan Sugar, whether it's Steve Jobs, or whether it's, you know, Elon Musk, whoever you think is your business
Mm-hmm.
leader. Do you think if there was money on the table that they worked for, that they would be A, not trying to chase it, B, when it got to a particular point that they wouldn't escalate? What a lot of businesses don't understand is that the power of a smaller business when dealing with a bigger business is having somebody to fight your corner.
Mm.
Because, you know, there's a lot of things at the moment. There's a lot of people who are saying to people, oh, we've got an accountant's package and I'm going to single out Zero. No hate to Zero. I love you, Zero. I don't use you, but I love you. And I just want
I
to,
do.
you know. Well, the thing is, they will then say to you, oh, you know, we've got these chasing mechanisms. Now, Zero's chasing mechanisms are great. They might even be really great, but they don't make people pay. If somebody's avoiding you, there's only so much that chasing mechanisms can do. It's
Mm-hmm.
just
Yep.
a machine churning out stuff. And if it's somebody who's a genuine person, an honest person, who effectively says, "Oh my God, I didn't even realize I'd just gone on holiday. I've come back from a cruise, and now I've got this debt, and oh, I didn't realize. I'm really sorry." And those are the people that send you payment. Those are good people. They just basically have inadvertently forgotten. They've still got their straw donkey and their bolero hat on, and you know, so you know, the sombrero hat on. They've completely forgotten. However, there are people who you need to chase, and that is
Yeah.
when you need to escalate. Having the power of the escalation, especially for a small business or a small to medium business, is incredibly powerful. But because, for example, you know, if you're talking about business leaders, they know the importance about assigning certain jobs to certain individuals. If
Yeah,
you
indeed.
know that you're not the type of person to pick up the phone and say, "Can you pay me?" then why would I spend half a day doing that? That's my job. My job is to sit there and say, right, which of the ways or the stuff in my armory or my arsenal am I going to use in order to catch this person? Because it literally sometimes is a cat and mouse game. There are two ways about it. So I would then say to that person, there is something that you can do for yourself. And I've got a list of things. And when you're ready for those, I'm happy to share those with you. But there are a list of things that you can do to make your life easier. And, you know, some of those things, you know, will be, for example, if you do good work and you provide good quality services, it's harder for somebody not to pay you.
Mm.
So if
Yep.
somebody comes and tiles your kitchen, and they do a really good job, and your partner says, "Whoa, that's a fantastic. This floor looks amazing." You're less likely to say, "Oh, I'm not going to pay him because it looks amazing."
Yeah. Yeah, whereas any flaws, cracks, etc., are likely to result in, well, we're not paying until this is resolved, or I'm just generally not very happy, and so you get the big delays to payment.
Correct. Those are little things. If you can get money up front, for example, that's great because people are used to paying up front now. They didn't used to be paying up front back in the day. I'd come from an era where at the end of the day it was 28 days delivery. Oh, send something off, you wait for 28 days. Or you wait for
Yeah,
7. You could do that in the 21st century, having a laugh. People want it now. I'm going
yeah,
on to Amazon as we speak, and I'm going to, and somebody will have it round in an hour.
yeah,
So it's a completely different, but you're used to paying up front. And that's where the difference is. So if your business model accounts for upfront payment, go for it. That's another thing that will save you a lot of grief because you know what's got coming in. Subscriptions, another one. If you can get people on a subscription, the only problem with that is that sometimes people can switch that off just like that because
yeah,
they don't want the subscription any further. However, if you can factor in maybe for a 3-month to a 6-month drop off, maybe that can work as well. All of these are things that can help you. The idea of chasing your money is something I feel that you can do, but it will sometimes will give you more stress than the debt
yeah.
you've already got. And that's what the problem is. You're trying to relieve yourself of stress. You're trying to breathe out, not inhaling all of this negative energy. And that's the problem with debt. It's quite negative energy.
Yeah, agreed. I love that because it strikes me that there's a few things that essentially almost, if you like, preventative debt management by, as you say, finding ways in which you can change either your payment process, the business model itself, the way in which you deliver your products and services that ultimately reduce slow payment, late payment, etc., which is awesome because prevention's definitely better than treatment.
Of
And
course.
then, as you say, as part of your process for chasing, yes, as the business leader, you do not want to be doing the end-to-end chasing. However, I can totally imagine that you might want members of your own team to be doing some of it, like
Of
a
course, definitely.
salesperson. They send an invoice, you would expect that salesperson to at least ask for payment or whatever at least a couple of times before you're like, right, I'm getting in the bailiffs.
Yeah.
But by the same token, there should be a stage in your process. And if you haven't decided that, then the problem is that it goes on forever, right? It just, which I've experienced in my own businesses. Actually, one of the worst things about that is the time it takes from your team. Never mind the cash that's out there, because as you say, sometimes the smallest amounts are the hardest to collect. And I've had it before where we'll have like, they owe us, I don't know, $12 or something. And you just be like, this, it's not even worth the time for a team member to ask me what we should do about it. Like as soon as we've even had that conversation, it's cost more than $12. And yet we're having to do this chasing. And the only reason we're having to do that is because we've essentially come to the end of our standard process for chasing it up and still nothing. And of course, we're not hearing back and whatever. And I love your point around actually there needs to be somewhere where there's an escalation and that it does get out off your plate, off the plate for the leader, off the plate for the team. What are some of the options there? Because I'm conscious that for a lot of business leaders, the concern is that the industry of debt recovery, where it goes outside of your business, where you've got someone, I mentioned bailiffs. That's in my head. That's the image,
Of
right?
course.
It's the massive
Yeah.
blokes who turn up and put foot through crack of door, and it's going and taking the big widescreen TV and taking that and so on. Now I know that whereas the space in which you work, you term ethical debt recovery, and so what are some of the options? What's a better way for businesses that they want to? They perhaps maybe even either want to continue the relationships with customers, although I take your point that you made earlier around those customers who you're getting to that point, you probably should be making a decision that you're not going to work with them in future. And therefore it is a much more transactional thing now, which is, I now just need the money. Like, I'm not going to work with them anymore, but I now just need the money. But for a lot of business leaders, they'll be worried about what that feels like, the message that they're putting out there, both real in terms of how they're seen, but also a sort of almost karmic of like,
Of
you know,
course.
what does this feel like? So what would you say in terms of their options? How should it work in today's, you know, modern world?
The difficulty that most people have is that there is an image about collecting money.
Mm.
Wherever you are in the world, there's a negative image attached to the collection of money. Now, I always work on the principle that there's been a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily accuse the debtor or the person that I'm pursuing, and I don't necessarily take the approach that that person is in the wrong. Sometimes my client's in the wrong. Sometimes I've had to go back to my client and said, well, you told me that he hasn't paid because you were supposed to supply him 1 million widgets. And they'll say, yeah. And I said, but he has only got 900,000 widgets. He's
Mm.
100,000 widgets short. Now, this gentleman, who's the person who's only got 900,000 widgets, he's effectively saying, as far as he's concerned, he would pay if he gets 100,000 widgets. Now, I'm the type of proactive person in the space that will say, give me 100,000 widgets and I'll take it down there and I'll
Yeah.
wait for you to transfer the money. So that's the pro. But it comes across as almost like a joke. But you end up in a situation where I've ended up on a few occasions where the debtor has basically said, could you come and work for me?
Yeah.
So you can't really get much better recommendation than
No,
that.
indeed.
So
Yeah. If the debtor's
yeah,
having that experience, then that's pretty
exactly.
positive.
So
Yeah.
it's about diplomacy. It's about diplomacy. And there's certain ways that you can do certain things that allow your client
Mm.
to retain that relationship should they choose it. And I always ask clients, do you want to retain the relationship? Because that's always it's never about bad feeling, because this is all about business. And the problem with business is that you look at LinkedIn, everybody is 3 degrees of separation away
Yeah.
from each other. So everybody technically can know everybody. There are certain things I won't put on LinkedIn because there are only 3 Clayton Cokes on LinkedIn. Literally, there are only 3 of them. So
Yeah.
therefore, as I said, it makes it much easier to ruin your reputation. When I work for my clients and when our business works for our clients, it's everything is about retaining their reputation. I am their representative. So I have to act in a particular way. I have to approach things in a particular way. My clients are not gangsters. They are, decent, upstanding people who have good careers, good professions, and I want to represent that, and that's my job. So a lot of people, and now this has happened ever since I started the business, it's always been about, oh, is this going to ruin my business?
Mm.
No, it will actually save your business, because if you don't try to recover outstanding monies because you're afraid of looking bad, I've never seen that in anybody's playbook who's ever been successful. Can you imagine Alan Sugar feeling bad about recovering money?
No. No, I can't.
He'll say, listen, mate, you owe me money. You lost me money. That would be Alan Sugar. And sorry, sorry, Lord Sugar, at the end of the day, just in case he's watching.
Oh yeah,
You never,
he definitely watches the show. So
you'll never know,
apologies.
because you can never tell. But that would be
It's
the
entirely
situation.
possible, actually. Yeah.
Entirely possible. Because that's what he would say. You owe me money. But
Yeah.
he wouldn't do it in such a way. He's got lawyers for that. He's
Mm.
got people who will chase that for him. Maybe back in the day when he first started, in the days of Amstrad, he'd ring up suppliers and say, now, what's the problem here then? But that's the way that you need to do it. I think it's important for business owners not to be afraid to recover outstanding debt. But the person that you choose, ensure that your values and their values align.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important, and I think, as you say, there are now other other options when it comes to debt recovery that mean that it is more gently done,
Of
or
course, without
tactfully
a doubt.
done, or whatever, which I think is great. One of the concerns or beliefs that business leaders might have is, well, the problem is not that we've just not delivered, or they haven't, or they haven't got our details to pay, or whatever. The issue is that they don't even respond. It's like they've just disappeared. How can debt recovery even work and get us that money if the person won't even pick up the phone, answer an email, etc.? How does that, in your experience, is that a real concern in the sense of, is that how it plays out? How do you make sure that you can even get through to people? And of course, but this will lead for useful tips of how to actually speak, get hold of a customer who is just going quiet, perhaps even earlier in the process. So how do you go about actually getting people to respond?
There's a saying, back to interpersonal relationships: how it starts is how it ends.
Okay.
Now, what happens with most people in business, they don't really know much about the person that they're with. They may have a number,
Mm-hmm.
they may have an address, but they don't have a lot of details about people because they don't know those people. They know their public face. They don't know them as an individual. And I always say, when you're doing business with people, I often get emails where people say, "Oh, hi, Clayton, blah, blah. I saw you on LinkedIn." Well, if you saw me on LinkedIn, why didn't you approach me on LinkedIn? Why are you sending me an email to my business email address? And actually, I won't respond to that email. I'll go back into LinkedIn and I will contact that person and wait for them to respond to me on LinkedIn. I won't entertain anybody that comes to me direct to my inbox, because I want to see who you're connected to, who's your relationship with, who do you know that I know that you know, etc. A lot of people are dealing with people that will not be able to be found. They will just literally disappear. And because we live in a world now where a lot of people are either working from home or they've got registered offices that they can give up at any particular point, it's not so easy to close a company, but it's easy to shut a company down over a period of time. You've also got people who, they set up a website, they stop paying for the website, then they just completely disappear. So then it's our job to then basically spend X amount of time finding the person in order to then ultimately dispense any kind of late payment or debt recovery action. So having, back to the Godfather again, version one, keep your friends, keep your
I love
friends
it.
close, but
I love it in the context of what you do as well with debt recovery. It's like, yeah, we're talking about ethical debt recovery. We're talking about, changing the mindset around it and using it. It's like, and now we're 3 for 3 on references to gangster films, and 2 of them are Godfather. No, love it. Go Clayton.
but it says keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. And the fact is that the mistake that a lot of business owners do, they do have relationships with people
Yeah.
that they don't know. So there's no attachment. If somebody's done business with you and they treat you effectively as just a person that they've done business with, there's no emotional attachment. So there's no desire that they're going to bump into you, at the golf club
Yeah.
or the football match or whatever, and then feel a little bit bad about not paying you. And unfortunately, humans need that kind of guilt stroke shame factor. Because once upon a time, X amount of years, it was terrible to be a bankrupt. You'd hang your head in shame. You'd be a person that would be, hiding in corners just because you were bankrupt. No, it's like, oh, I've had 2 bankruptcies, I've done this, but I've come back. But how many businesses crashed as a result of those bankruptcies?
Yeah. So as a result, the key then is doing your research, like looking at understanding where they are, and and as a result, finding other ways to reach them, I guess.
Of course, because that's
all
our
you've
job.
got is an email address,
Yeah.
and you're getting their responses, you're going to have to try other methods. If all
Well,
you've
of
got is a
course.
phone number, you're going to have to find through different methods. As you say, it sounds like social media can be a really effective way of doing
Of
that, and
course.
other ways in which you can find them, and as I suppose, get messages in front of them that make them feel similar to if they were passing you at the golf club,
Right.
so that they feel like, yeah, you know what, it'll be easier if I just pay this, because otherwise this becomes a problem.
But of course, but remember one thing, unless you have some escalation in place, you need that card up your sleeve, because unless you have that, you don't have any shock value.
No.
You don't have any shock value. That's the whole point. A lot of people don't seem to understand. A lot of people would recover their money if they understood that they need to give something in order to get something. And for the most part, they don't necessarily understand that for the most part, you don't always end up paying a massive amount of money. But there are some people whose attitude is, I don't want to have to pay 10 or 15 or 20% of money that I've already, I'm already owed. And I get that. I understand that logic. But the problem is at the moment, you have nothing.
Yeah, powerful. And so when you can turn that round, I guess it becomes life-changing for the business, because
Totally.
when they're able to collect what they're owed, and do so either through internal processes or stages of the process where it's out to escalation and it goes through that, presumably you're seeing clients that go from under pressure and really struggling and it damaging relationships to having relatively good positions in cash. Like what's can you give an example of like biggest swing of gone from X to Y? Like, because the risk is that it kind of feels like, oh, this feels like, small marginal gains. Like, okay, well, maybe 5% of my payments are getting to a point of escalation, and then of those, maybe only half can be collected, and da da da. What's the reality of impact
I
that
think
you
most people
tend
are
to expect?
carrying about 10% and upwards of debt easily.
Right.
Some, there's some people who are extreme, but a lot of people factor in, because don't get me wrong, people can use things like factoring or
Mm-hmm.
credit invoicing and stuff like that. But I always say, unless you're trying to grow your business for a specific purpose, and I have to use street analogy again, don't get high on your own supply. Because people are so used to getting credit. I remember meeting a chap once at an event, and he was like, yeah, I don't need you. I said, sorry, I don't need you, because guess what? I get all my invoices paid as soon as they come out, because, I've got a factoring company and they take 10%.
Okay. Yeah.
And I said, well, yeah, but you're like a grown up man riding a bicycle with stabilizers on.
Yeah, and paying for it.
Exactly. The fact is, if he said, I'm doing this for a year, or, factoring and
Mm.
invoice discounting, especially if you've got big clients, if your client is Ernst& Young or KPMG and you want to factor your invoices, for the most part, you're going to get your money at some point. If your client's Tesco, for the most part, you're going to get your money. If your client's Aldi, you're going to get your
Yeah, you're
money.
just throwing money away through having the factoring.
Because a lot of businesses don't factor in the idea that they may be waiting. Your terms of business may be 30 days. But Tesco's doesn't pay anybody in 30 days, not that I remembered. From the last time I
Yeah.
looked at their credit report, that may have all changed. So
Yeah.
people can shoot me down in flames. But the reality of it is, no, the ultimate thing is that these guys don't pay people within 30, especially if you're under a certain limit. I think if you're under £1,000, at one point, Tesco didn't pay you in 30 days.
Yeah.
So if you had a £700 invoice with them, 30 days, you weren't seeing that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's unfortunately we're up on time, but this has
Definitely.
been awesome. Like, Clayton, where can people learn more about you, your work, and of course the Cashflow Show?
Fair enough. Thank you very much for the opportunity. As Clayton Coke, they can find me on LinkedIn under the name Clayton M Coke. I think it's followed by FRSA, Fellow of the Royal
Yeah,
Society of
it is.
Arts. They can also find me on the website, which is PRMS Ltd, Papa Romeo Mike Sierra Lima Tango Delta.co.uk. They can also find us on the podcast, which is the Cashflow Show. And they'll see a picture of me wearing a shirt similar to this that they'll be able to recognize, and where we talk about things very similar to what Alexis is talking about here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Clayton. I knew that we'd be able to get some absolute gems from you in terms of cash flow and debt management, but particularly the way in which you've broken down some of the pieces around debt recovery, making it feel like something that should be a must as part of people's business processes. Definitely. Rather than a port of last resort, I think is really crucial. And I think as you kind of teed up early on, the issue is one of mindset as a starting point, and you've also given us a series of steps to go through to really challenge it. So thank you so much for sharing your insights today.
You're welcome. Most definitely. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I hope that your audience gets some sort of focus and clarity from the things that I've suggested. It's by no means definitive, but a lot of it is quite practical.
Yeah, no, I love that. No, that's fantastic. And I hope, as you say, like for our listeners, I hope this conversation has kind of shed light on some of the both the emotional toll and the stress that can be associated with it. But I think a lot of that is a bit of a given. I think the bit that I saw huge value is that clarity on what steps need to be taken to safeguard your business and your personal relationships and all the impact, but also how comfortable those steps can be made, because it's not just about surviving in business, it's about thriving and having less stress. So that's really powerful. So absolutely love that. Highly recommend people check out Clayton's resources. I mentioned earlier that my co-founder Paddy and I have recently published a guide for business leaders on improving cash flow, using processes to improve cash flow, which people can find at airmanual.link/cashflow/ebook. And you can get that as a free guide. Please do share it with anyone that you think might get value. Clayton, I'd love your feedback on it as well. I'm sure that we've missed some pieces around how we make sure that debt recovery is part of cash collection. So that'd be something for us to revisit. But otherwise, Clayton, thanks so much for joining me on the De-Stress Your Business podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, Alexis. Absolute pleasure.
Cool, fantastic. And to everyone listening, if you found value in today's conversation, then we would love to hear about it. Please do share it on social media, tag us in, let us know your favorite key takeaway. We'd really appreciate it. It makes a big difference. But Clayton, thanks again for joining me. Everyone else, until next time.